Today we're going to be looking at how to determine if ratios form a proportion using simplification. We have a couple of examples that we're going to work through together here, so let's get started. It's important to note that in order for ratios to form a proportion, they must be equivalent or equal ratios. And in order to determine if ratios form a proportion, as we can see up top highlighted in yellow, we're going to simplify the ratios and then check if both sides are equal. So jumping right into question number 1, we're being asked to determine if the ratios 16:4 and 80:20 form a proportion. So the first thing we're going to do down below is we're going to rewrite these ratios in fractional form, and then we're going to simplify those ratios. So the first ratio here we have is 16:4. And we're going to divide both of these terms by their greatest common factor in order to simplify this ratio. And in this case, both terms share the greatest common factor of 4, so we're going to divide both of these terms in this ratio by 4 in order to simplify this ratio. When we divide 4 by 4, we get 1, and when we divide 16 by 4, we get 4 for the simplified ratio of 4:1. Now moving on to our second ratio, where we have the ratio of 80:20. And this ratio, the terms share the greatest common factor of 20. So in order to simplify this ratio, we're going to divide both of these terms in the ratio by 20. When we divide 20 by 20, we get 1. And then when we divide 80 by 20, we get 4 for the simplified ratio of 4:1. And as we can see, both of these ratios are equal, which means that these ratios form a proportion, which we can write as 16:4 is equal to, it forms a proportion with 80:20. Now moving on to question number 2, where this time we're being asked to determine if the ratios 3:15 and 4:24 form a proportion. So the first thing we're going to do down below is we're going to rewrite these ratios in fractional form. So first we have 3:15, and then we're going to simplify this ratio by dividing both parts by their greatest common factor. And here we share a greatest common factor of 3, so we're going to divide both of these terms in this ratio by 3 in order to simplify this ratio. When we divide 15 by 3, we get 5. And then when we divide 3 by 3, we get 1 for the simplified ratio of 1:5. Now moving on to our second ratio, where this time we have the ratio of 4:24. And this ratio, both terms share a greatest common factor of 4, so we're going to divide both of the terms in this ratio by 4 in order to simplify this ratio. When we divide 24 by 4, we get 6, and then when we divide 4 by 4, we get 1 for the simplified ratio of 1:6. And since these ratios are not equal, that means that these ratios do not form a proportion. They are not proportionate. So we can write this as 3:15 is not equal to, it does not form a proportion with 4:24. So now let's test our knowledge. Pause this video and try these problems out on your own, and then play the rest of this video to see if you got the same answers. The first problem here, question number 3, we have the ratios of 15:25 and 6:18. And we're going to determine if these ratios form a proportion. So the first ratio here, both terms here share the greatest common factor of 5, so we're going to divide both terms of this ratio by 5 in order to simplify this ratio. When we divide 25 by 5, we get 5, and then when we divide 15 by 5, we get 1 for the simplified ratio of 1:5. Now for the second ratio, we have the ratio of 6:18, and both terms here share the greatest common factor of 6, so we're going to divide both terms of this ratio by 6 in order to simplify this ratio. When we divide 18 by 6, we get 3, and when we divide 6 by 6, we get 1 for the simplified ratio of 1 to 3. And since these ratios are not equal, that tells us that these ratios do not form a proportion, which we can write as 15 to 25 is not equal to, it does not form a proportion with 6 to 18. Now moving on to our last problem, where this time we have the ratios of 8 to 32 and 4 to 12, and we're going to figure out if these ratios form a proportion. For the first ratio of 8 to 32, both of these terms share the greatest common factor of 8, so we're going to divide both terms in this ratio by 8 in order to simplify our first ratio. When we divide 32 by 8, we get 4, and when we divide 8 by 8, we get 1 for the simplified ratio of 1 to 4. Now moving on to the second ratio, where this time we have 4 to 12, and both terms in this ratio share the greatest common factor of 4, so we're going to divide both terms in this ratio by 4 in order to simplify this ratio. When we divide 12 by 4, we get 3, and when we divide 4 by 4, we get 1 for the simplified ratio of 1 to 3. And clearly here these ratios are not equal, so that means that our ratios do not form a proportion, which we can write as 8 to 32 is not proportionate, it's not equal to 4 to 12. So hopefully by now you understand how to determine if ratios form a proportion using simplification. Help make math less complicated by smashing those like and subscribe buttons. As always, enjoy today's math journey.